case that has baffled investigators for months may have just taken its biggest turn yet. Stunning new information that could completely change what authorities believe happened to Lynette Hooker, the Michigan woman who vanished during a sailing trip in the Bahamas. From the very beginning, her husband, Brian Hooker, told investigators that Lynette fell from the couple's dinghy during a late-night ride, hit the water, swept away by strong currents, led him to paddle back to shore alone. And despite an extensive search, Lynette has never been found.
Hello, honey, it's Dad. That's how the call began. Not, your mom is missing. Not panic, not urgency. Just a calm voice on a voicemail, telling a daughter that her mother had vanished somewhere in the dark waters of the Bahamas. The daughter who received that message says her stepfather sounded monotone, relaxed, like he was reading off a grocery list, not describing the disappearance of his wife of 25 years. Months later, investigators would pull GPS data off that same man's phone, and what it showed didn't match a single detail of the story he'd given police. This is the case of Lynette Hooker. Before we go further, if you're new here, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Mistora Crimes covers the cases where the official story and the evidence don't quite line up, and this one has more turns than most. Let's get into it. Lynette Hooker was 55 years old, from a small town called Unsolved in Michigan. For more than a decade, she and her husband Brian lived a life a lot of people only dream about. They sold their life on land, bought a sailboat named Soulmate, and spent their days island hopping, diving with sea turtles, and posting their adventures online for thousands of followers under an account called the Sailing Hookers. To the outside world, they looked like partners in every sense, sailing side by side, calling themselves co-captains, sharing sunsets and anchorages with a community of people who followed their journey year after year. But behind the curated footage of turquoise water and easy island life, the picture was apparently more complicated. According to Lynette's daughter, Carly Aylesworth, her mother and stepfather had a turbulent relationship, one that grew especially volatile when alcohol was involved. Carly has said the two had separated at points over the years before eventually getting back together. Those details wouldn't come into focus of the public until after Lynette vanished. On the night of April 4th, 2026, that life ended somewhere in the waters near Elbow Cay in the Bahamas. According to Brian, the couple left Hopetown around 7:30 that evening in their small 8-foot dinghy, heading back to Soulmate. The weather turned rough. He says Lynette was thrown from the boat and that she had the engine key with her when she went into the water. Without power, he says he was left to paddle for hours through the dark, alone, until he finally reached a marina at 4 a.m. and raised the alarm. That's the account he gave to police. And for the first few days, that was the story the world knew. Search and rescue crews mobilized quickly. The Royal Bahamas Police Force, the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, and the United States Coast Guard all joined the effort, scanning the water by boat and by air across a wide stretch of the Abaco Islands. Cadaver dogs were brought in within about 2 weeks. But after days without a trace of Lynette, officials made a quiet but significant shift. They stopped calling it a search and rescue mission. They started calling it search and recovery. That shift in language told the public something the investigators weren't yet saying outright. And almost immediately, questions started forming around Brian's story. The first person to publicly push back wasn't a detective. It was Lynette's daughter, Carly. Carly has said she doesn't understand how her mother, an experienced swimmer with more than 10 years of sailing behind her, could have simply disappeared that way. She's questioned why Brian, a former Marine, didn't anchor the dinghy and go in after her, rather than paddling away from where she went under. And then there was that voicemail, the one where he sounded so calm while describing the worst night of his life. Carly has also alleged that the relationship between her mother and stepfather involved past incidents of violence. It's important to be clear here. These are allegations from a family member, not findings from a court. Brian, through his attorney Terrell Butler, has categorically and unequivocally denied any wrongdoing, specifically addressing Carly's claims. There is one documented incident from years earlier that adds context, though it doesn't resolve anything. Back in 2015, Michigan police responded to a domestic dispute between Brian and Lynette in which each accused the other of assault. According to that police report, Lynette was intoxicated at the time and said she'd been struck. She had no visible injuries, and prosecutors ultimately found insufficient evidence to determine who had started the altercation. No charges were filed against either of them. It's a single incident, more than a decade old, but it's become part of how the public has come to understand the marriage behind the social media persona. For days after Lynette disappeared, Bahamian police arrested Brian Hooker. He was held for questioning, and at one point his own attorney revealed that investigators were asking him directly about causing harm that resulted in his wife's death. That's not a normal missing persons interview. That's the language of a homicide investigation. Brian was described as emotional during questioning, at times breaking down in tears. His lawyer said he continued to deny causing Lynette's death and remained hopeful she'd be found alive. Under Bahamian law, his detention was extended over the following days as investigators worked against a deadline to either charge him or release him. After 5 days in custody, with no body recovered and no formal charge filed, Bahamian authorities released him. He told reporters he planned to stay in the Bahamas until his visa ran out, saying finding his wife was his only focus. He even said he considered hiring a plane to help search the islands from the air. Then, just days later, he left the country. His attorney said it was because his mother back home was gravely ill and that he needed to be at her bedside. To some, that was understandable. To others, including Carly, it looked like someone stepping away from the one place where the truth might still be sitting on the ocean floor. Carly would later say publicly that she hadn't spoken to Brian since the day after her mother went missing. For weeks, the investigation seemed to stall. Brian had not been charged. Lynette had not been found. And the case appeared to be exactly what these cases often become. A story with no body and no clear answer, slowly fading from headlines. Then, in late May, everything changed. A U.S. official confirmed that investigators had pulled GPS data from one of Brian's electronic devices, and that data did not match the account he had given police. Instead of showing a man drifting helplessly after losing his wife, the data reportedly showed the device moving out onto the water, stopping in the Sea of Abaco, and then returning. That gave investigators something they hadn't had before, a specific location to search, based not on Brian's word, but on his own phone. The U.S. Coast Guard reopened the investigation. A cutter arrived in the Bahamas, carrying specialized divers. They brought underwater drones, remote-operated vehicles, and a cadaver dog. Investigators also revisited the Abaco Inn, the last place Lynette had reportedly been seen alive. This wasn't a routine follow-up search. This was a targeted operation built around evidence that appeared to contradict the only witness account that existed. Investigators also seized both of the couple's vessels. The dinghy, the small boat where Lynette was last seen, was taken into custody in the Bahamas. Soulmate, the yacht they call home, had already been seized weeks earlier, roughly 40 nautical miles off the coast of Florida. Both were sent for forensic examination, with evidence eventually processed at an FBI facility in Quantico, Virginia. Carly and Lynette's parents provided DNA samples to help identify any remains that might surface. Her mother, Darlene Hamlet, said something that added another layer to the story. She said Lynette had confided in her, that she wanted to leave Brian, that she told her mother she couldn't take it anymore and needed to come home. According to Darlene, Lynette had even bought a plane ticket. She never used it. Darlene also said that, throughout the investigation, she never fully believed her son-in-law's version of events. By June, officials confirmed something even more significant. The case, they said, had been treated for weeks under a federal framework that covers the foreign murder of a U.S. national. Officials were careful to note this wasn't a sudden shift, just an accurate description of how the investigation had already been running behind the scenes. Still, hearing that label attached to the case changed how the public understood it. This was no longer being framed simply as a tragic accident at sea. Around this same time, there were also reports that Brian was declining to cooperate further with investigators, a claim that added more tension to an already strained relationship between him and Lynette's family. Then came what might be the most disorienting update yet. By July, people close to the investigation learned something that seemed to unravel Brian's story completely. Sources told family members that evidence suggested Lynette may have actually made it back to Soulmate that night, not swept away by the current, not lost at sea in the dark, possibly back on the boat with her husband.
As possible, it is. The evidence is clear and defining. She made it back on board, Jesse, and she was dead on board that boat. And no, I have not been given specifics, but I can tell you this. It's not witnesses, it's forensic evidence. And forensics can be so much.
If true, that detail doesn't just poke a hole in Brian's account. It rewrites the entire narrative. And it's reportedly part of why investigators are now examining whether there was a physical altercation aboard that vessel. So where does that leave us? What we know for certain is this. Lynette Hooker went missing on April 4th, 2026, off the coast of the Bahamas during a boat trip with her husband. Her body has never been found. Brian Hooker was detained, questioned specifically about causing her death, and released without charge. GPS evidence from his device reportedly contradicts key parts of his story. Both boats involved have been seized and examined by federal investigators. And officials have confirmed they're investigating this as a possible murder of a U.S. citizen abroad. What remains allegation, not fact, is just as important to say clearly. Carly's claims about a violent history between her mother and stepfather have not been proven in any court. The specific nature of what the GPS data shows in full detail has not been made fully public. What may have happened aboard Soulmate, if anything happened at all, has not been confirmed. And Brian Hooker has not been charged with any crime. He continues, through his attorney, to deny any wrongdoing. That's the uncomfortable truth about cases like this one. Evidence can shift the story without finishing it. A phone's GPS trail can raise more questions than it answers. And a family can be left waiting month after month for a body that may never surface and a case that may never fully close. So we're left with the questions that actually matter here. If Lynette made it back to that boat, what happened after that? Why would an account change so significantly between what was reported and what the devices reveal? And is there enough here to eventually bring formal charges? Or will this join the long list of cases where everyone suspects an answer, but no court ever confirms it? We don't know yet. Nobody does, not even investigators. Not fully. What do you think happened that night on the water? Let us know your theory in the comments below. And if you want more cases like this one, real investigations, real evidence, real unanswered questions, subscribe to Mistora Crimes so you don't miss what comes next.